Okay, so last time we talked about European exploration of Kansas, and so this time we're going to be talking about not only American exploration, but eventually what will be American expansion westward. So again, this is about 100 years after Bourgmont had explored Kansas, and so this time, please again, make sure you're taking decent Cornell notes. Make sure you get the summary, you answer I'm sorry, you get the essential question, then you answer the essential question in the summary. Okay. So our essential question is, why did Americans come to Kansas? So why did they come to Kansas? That's something hopefully that we will answer today. So the first thing that we need to talk about is the U.S. wasn't nearly the size that it is today. The U.S. was largely this area right here, the pink. So, we see Virginia, here's Kentucky, Tennessee, Wisconsin. So all of this land right here, this was all of the U.S. And what happens, and literally the U.S. is going to double in size, is in 1803, Thomas Jefferson, who is the president, is going to make what's called the Louisiana Purchase, which is all of this land right here. And he is going to purchase that from the French. So just to kind of give you a little bit more of an insight of what that would look like today, this is a little bit better map, but I kind of like it. But you can see the Louisiana Purchase are going to include states like Arkansas, Missouri, Iowa, South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Oklahoma, even where we're at, Kansas. So all of this land is going to become part of the U.S. through the Louisiana Purchase. So in talking about the Louisiana Purchase, we need to understand, why were they even interested in buying this land? So Thomas Jefferson was really concerned about the western part of the U.S. And when I say that he was concerned about the western part of the U.S., what he's really concerned is right here you can see that here's the border between the United States and what was the French lands. Is right here, this is the Mississippi River. And this river, it's a very big river. It's kind of like, they didn't have roads, they didn't have planes. And so these are the main ways that they ship and they move goods. But he knew that this was very important. But the problem is when we get all the way down to here, the Mississippi River goes into the French lands and then it eventually comes out right here into the Gulf of Mexico. And so what Jefferson wanted to do is he wanted to be able to control the Mississippi River and use it. And originally what he had done is he had gone to the French and he just wanted to buy this land right here. He figured if I could just buy this, then it'll allow me to control the rest of the Mississippi River, and we can go ahead and trade and not have any problems. So he went to the French originally with the design of just purchasing this land right here so that he could control the Mississippi River all the way down into what's called the mouth of the Louisiana, or mouth of the Mississippi River, which would be in like New Orleans. And so what happens is that they go to Napoleon. He is a famous French ruler, and he's going to be a leader at the time. And the problem is that Napoleon was involved in a lot of wars in Europe. And if there's one thing that you need when you're involved with a lot of wars, it's you need money. And so Napoleon was really hard up for cash. He needed money. And so what he ended up doing is saying, well, instead of you just buying this part right here, why don't I sell you all of this land and I'll sell it all to you really cheap for about $15 million. So $15 million, it seems like a lot today. It was actually a lot then, but when you consider that Jefferson was willing to pay, I think it's like $5 million just for this, $15 million for all of this was a really good price. And so Jefferson went ahead and he made this purchase and he bought all of this land. And really that's how Kansas becomes part of the U.S., is through purchasing this land. Now what will kind of happen that we kind of miss is, remember we talked about how part of this is going to be claimed by Spanish and part of this is going to be claimed by the French. Between the French and the Spanish, they kind of negotiate where this line is going to be. Something we really don't need to know about, but in case you were kind of wondering what happened. But nonetheless, Jefferson buys all this for $15 million. which today still seems like a lot, but it was a really, really good deal to buy all that land. Okay, so after Jefferson buys all this land, the main issue is that he really doesn't know what he just bought. Um, and so, what he does and what people are going to do afterwards is they're going to send explorers or people to kind of chart and look at the land to see what they bought. And so, we're going to actually look at three different explorers for this period. And so, the first one is probably maybe somebody you've heard of, but they're called Lewis and Clark. And that was the email I got. Lewis and Clark did this really long expedition. Um, they started here in Pittsburgh, actually went down the Ohio River, made their way to St. Louis, and eventually what their main object or their main goal is to find a way to the Pacific. They knew that the Pacific Ocean was out here, but they were not sure like how they could get there. And so what Lewis and Clark do is they go all the way up through the Missouri River, all the way through here. So this is like South Dakota. They get up here into Montana. They cut across through Idaho, and eventually they make it through Washington. They make it here um, to the Pacific Ocean, and then they make it all the way back. So it took them about 2 years to do it. Um, in relationship to Kansas, the Kansas River, they only spend about 14 days in Kansas, and it's only around the part where, if we were to think of like that northeast part, Kansas is like a perfect kind of rectangle, but we have that part where the Missouri River goes through and it cuts through it, kind of about right, should be about right here, okay? And this is really the only part of Kansas that they actually explore is along the Kansas River. So places kind of along that. And even though they only spent 14 days here, they did run into and they meet the Kansa, and they have some trade and relationships with them. Other than that, that's pretty much it. They didn't have too much to say about Kansas. Um, they are kind of like the first American explorers to go through this region um, for the government to find out what's going on. But they really don't have too much to say or really give a lot of input about what we should know really about Kansas. So that was the first group of explorers. So the second one was somebody named Zebulon Pike. And so Zebulon Pike, he actually cut right across Kansas. You can kind of see he went from St. Louis, went right across March, Missouri, and then he went all the way across Kansas, up, down, went to Pikes Peak, which is in Colorado. It's named after him. And he's actually captured by the Spanish. They take him all the way to Mexico, and then he's freed. He could go. And so a lot of his notes were actually taken by the Spanish. He was on their lands, and they thought that he was a spy. But he goes through Kansas. He's probably the first American to walk all the way across Kansas. And the thing is that even though we don't have a lot of his notes, the one thing that he does describe about our state is he says that it's sandy and he says it's dry. And more importantly, when he looked at Kansas, he thought that this was probably not a great place to farm or to have people live or settlements, because he was going across the Flint Hills, as he was going across western Kansas, he noticed that there weren't a lot of trees. So if there weren't a lot of trees, then maybe his impression was that you can't grow crops, because if you think of the farms and places on the East Coast, a lot of trees. So he did not think it would be good for farming. He did not think that people would want to live here because he thought it was dry and sandy. And then our last explorer is somebody named Stephen H. Long. And this map, it's not the best map. It goes like this, and it shows that he went through these parts of Kansas. Actually, he comes down into Kansas here. I'm not sure why they don't show a very good map. But the other thing too is, and it doesn't show it either, is that he actually comes back through and he goes through this southern part. And then in Stephen Long's report about the area in Kansas, especially when he gets into like the southern part of Kansas, and his overall impression is he calls Kansas the Great American Desert. He doesn't think anybody could actually live here. let alone anybody could actually develop a settlement here or people would want to farm here. Because very much like Pike, he saw it as being a place that was really sandy, a place that was dry, a place that he couldn't have farms like that you had in other places along the East Coast. Okay, so now that we've talked about all three of them, the last thing we need to do is, so what does this mean for the future of Kansas? So these reports are going to really influence what government officials think of Kansas. And so the first thing that these reports do is they help the US government to realize that they have a large amount of open land, that the amount of land that they received or actually purchased is going to double the size of the US. The US literally doubles in size just because of this land. And so they have huge amounts of land. And at first, because, and we'll talk a little bit about this later on, but Kansas is going to be seen as this great American desert. It's a place that nobody could really live, or maybe places that white settlers would want to live. And so it's going to really quickly kind of be looked at as maybe a place to put people. And we'll talk about who those people are. But a lot of people in the US government saw this as a place that nobody would want, so why don't we relocate people who are on lands that we do want and put them there? And then furthermore, after that, for many, Kansas is going to become a place for one to make a future. So even though we have these large amount of open lands, and it's going to be a place for the government to put indigenous people, even after that, within a 15 to 20 year period, people are going to start to see Kansas as a place for them to have opportunities and a place for them to make a future. Okay, so that is it. Make sure you answer the essential question in the summary. These notes will help you with some of the assignments you're going to have, and again, this information will be on the test. One last thing I do want to talk about is citing sources within your answers. So using your sources, whether they be primary or secondary source, to strengthen your argument or your point. Sometimes you just need to use evidence. You need to say, this is, Borgmont, whatever Borgmont mission was, is you need to explain it. So I give you an example. Like if I'm asking you to give an example, say, Borgmont mission was to establish peace with the various tribes. He thought by establishing peace, they could trade, quote, with one another. This showed that he has good intentions in working with the various tribes. So you kind of say right here, like his mission was establishing peace. And then you're going to use right here your evidence. And you said that he thought by establishing peace, they could trade with one another. So this came from your secondary source. You don't have to put like where it came from, you just have to put it in quotations. And then what happens is you need to do something that explains, or what we say, the kind of fancy term is qualify. You need to explain this term. And so by then saying this shows, or the evidence that you presented, this shows that he has good intentions in working with the various tribes. So you need to go ahead and make sure that you're using your sources and your material within your assignments. Okay. Please let me know if you have any questions about this. I'm more than willing to help you, but you need to make sure that you have evidence in there.